Why is Donald Trump holding back on China but coming down hard on India? The contrast is striking. Beijing gets a 90-day tariff truce, while New Delhi gets a 50% tariff wall. Here's what's happened. US President Donald Trump hasn't decided whether to impose tariffs on China for buying oil from Russia. His Vice President, J.D. Vance, told Fox News that the president is thinking about it, but hasn't made a firm decision. Vance said the China situation is more complicated than India's, because US-China ties affect many other issues beyond the war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, India's already facing the harshest US tariffs in the world. The US first put 25% tariffs on Indian goods, and last week Trump doubled that with another 25%, in retaliation for India's Russian oil purchases. That's now a total of 50%, putting India in the same tariff category as Russia, China, and Brazil. China, for its part, isn't backing down. On August 8, its foreign ministry told Bloomberg News that it has every right to buy oil from Russia, calling it legitimate and lawful trade, and said it will keep taking energy decisions based on its own national interests. The numbers tell their own story. From January to June this year, U.S. exports to China were $56.01 billion. Imports were $167.48 billion, a $111.47 billion trade deficit. In January alone, the deficit was $31.74 billion. By June, the gap had narrowed to $9.51 billion, with imports dropping and exports slightly rising. On the China-Russia front, Beijing's imports from Moscow rose slightly in July to $10.06 billion, the highest since March. But overall this year, those imports are still 7.7% lower than the same period in 2024. The trade war earlier this year saw both US and China piling on tariffs. Right now, Chinese goods entering the US face almost 55% tariffs, while US goods into China face about 32%. Both sides had an August 12 deadline to resolve their disputes. But Trump's tone has shifted. He now says his original 145% tariff on China was too high, and talks about the possibility of a good deal. Behind the scenes, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has met Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng 3 times this year. May in Stockholm, June in London, and late July again in Stockholm. In May, they agreed to a 90-day tariff truce. That truce is still in place. Negotiations since then have focused on what concessions each side can make. Some say the softening on China is pure politics and economics. Now, let's step back from trade to politics. Trump has always called himself the president of peace, boasting of mediating conflicts. India-Pakistan, Thailand-Cambodia, Israel-Iran, Armenia-Azerbaijan, and now Russia-Ukraine. But not everyone has given him credit. India refused to thank him for halting Operation Sindoor. Thailand rejected mediation altogether. Pakistan and Cambodia, on the other hand, have publicly praised his role. Armenia and Azerbaijan have published the text of U.S. brokered peace agreement. Experts are now speculating multiple reasons behind Trump's tough stance on India. First, New Delhi's refusal to acknowledge Trump's role in the Pakistan mediation may have annoyed him, leading to India being targeted more aggressively. Second, Trump's push to bring supply chains back to the U.S., especially from China, started hurting American producers, especially after China restricted exports of rare earth elements in April 2025. U.S. companies demanded a fix. Third, with his campaign focused on ending the Ukraine war, cutting deficits, and bringing jobs back from India to U.S., someone had to be the scapegoat. India fit that bill. It was already tangled in H-1B visa disputes, trade disagreements, and a refusal to cut Russian oil imports. The EU also factors in. Europe imports processed Russian oil from India, but targeting India directly helps the US pressure Moscow without upsetting NATO allies. And finally, Trump may have disliked India's recent diplomatic thaw with China after years of high-level freeze since the Galwan clash. India, however, isn't sitting quiet. On August 6, it reaffirmed its strategic ties with Moscow at an India-Russia working group meet. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi's upcoming visit to Tianjin for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit has been confirmed. So for India, it's now about balancing relations with the US, Russia, and China, while facing a 50% tariff wall from Washington. For Trump, it seems to be about striking a deal with Beijing, punishing Delhi, and still calling himself the president of peace. The deadline for India to avoid secondary US tariffs is August 27th. And for China? They've possibly got another 90 days. For more news and updates, watch Mint News.